Welcome to everyone joining us live online here in Studio 58A at the Jamaica Information Service. My name is Vaughn Davis. I'll be your host. Here with me today are Vice Chairman of the Economic Growth Council, Ambassador Dr. Nigel Clarke. And to the far right, we have IMF Resident Representative to Jamaica, Constant Lonkeng Ngouna. I hope I got that right.
Perfect.
All right, wonderful. And we are here today to talk about the 2017 High-Level IMF Forum taking place next week, Thursday. And it will be looking at the IMF's relationship with the region as a whole, and I suppose Jamaica in particular. But I understand that this is not the first forum. In fact, there have been, I believe it's the sixth. And this is the second time Jamaica is hosting the forum. But nevertheless, I think there are many persons who perhaps don't really know much about it. So I'd like you both to just give me an overview of the forum itself and some of its objectives. If you could go ahead, Dr. Clarke.
Sure. So, high-level forum that takes place in Jamaica next week follows on from a similar forum that took place last year in Trinidad, and before that I believe it was in St. Kitts, and before that it was in Jamaica in Montego Bay in 2014, and before that in the Bahamas. All the independent countries of the Caribbean are members of the IMF, and a forum are important members of the IMF, and a forum like this each year allows for high-level policy discussion to take place on matters and issues that are common to the countries of the region. So it tends to attract high-level policymakers. It's additionally special this year as it coincides with the visit of the managing director of the IMF, Madame Christine Lagarde.
Yes.
And her visit coincides with the forum, and she will be making an open address at the forum on Thursday, and it makes it additionally special for that reason. The purpose, the conference gathers as presenters, speakers, panelists, high-level policymakers in the Caribbean, Jamaica, Dominica, the Bahamas, St. Kitts, Trinidad, Barbados, Guyana, etc. Persons who have been in office, persons who are in office, ministers of finance, central banks, persons from the multilateral community, and we have a few critical topics that are irrelevant to all the countries of the region, and the idea is that these topics are explored in detail from many different perspectives, and the audience consists of high-level decision makers in the public sector, in the private sector, members of the diplomatic community, and members of the multilateral community.
Dr. Mr. Lonkeng, anything you'd like to add where that's concerned?
Yes, just to stress that this underscore the partnership that the IMF want to sustain with Jamaica and with the Caribbean region. And this conference comes against a background of Caribbean that has been lacking growth for many decades. You may recall that Caribbean countries grew very fast post-independence, independence in the 60s and 70s, reaching even high-level income status. But over the past 3 decades, growth has not been stellar. And just looking at the numbers, Caribbean economy grew at an average of 2.1% between 2000 and 2015, compared to 4.1% for other emerging and developing countries. So this speaks to structural impediments to growth in the Caribbean region, including some of the topics that will be looked at the conference. Think about crime, which has been identified as one of the single most important deterrent to growth in the case of Jamaica, and certainly true in many other Caribbean countries. And another topic is how to make financial inclusion to sustain growth, and how to strike the balance between regulation and growth. You want just the right amount of regulations, and Caribbean countries throughout their history have gone through the extreme of being of regulating too much and some of regulating too little. So you want to strike the right
Before we
balance.
get too into detail about the different plenary sessions and so on, I wanted to, in an overview kind of way, the theme for this year's forum is Unleashing Growth and Strengthening Resilience. How is the forum structured to bring this out so that attendees can appreciate that?
Well, as Constant mentioned, growth is a challenge for all the countries of the Caribbean, and we in Jamaica are no strangers to that struggle, having had growth of less than 1% over the past 30 years. The conference is structured with an opening address from the managing director of the IMF in the morning, accompanied by an opening address from the Prime Minister of Jamaica. Thereafter, there are 4 sessions, an hour and a half each in length or thereabouts, and those sessions have a moderator and panelists. The panelists are high-level policymakers from the region, as well as from outside of the region who can lend their expertise. And the topics, if you want me to go, just give you an outline of the topics, and we can discuss them in detail later. The topics, Council mentioned the first one, it's about growth in the Caribbean, the growth challenge rather, and the linkage between crime, sort of youth unemployment, and lack of growth. And that is something that is fairly common throughout the region, even though it's accentuated in Jamaica. Later on we can tell you about some of the people who will be speaking on that panel.
We'll be going into that.
So the next session is on the financial sector and on regulation of the financial sector, and having an environment where you have the appropriate levels of risk being taken.
Encouraging the growth and a more risk-taking private sector. And
that's the
that
third
partnership with government.
Correct. That's the third session. But the second session is on fiscal policy and electoral cycles, and then we have a session. The fourth session is a session where the managing director of the IMF interviews 2 prime ministers of the region, Prime Minister Holness and Prime Minister Mitchell of Grenada, along with other senior ministers, a deputy prime minister from Bahamas, who and that should be a very interesting session.
Very interesting,
something I left out, and something we need to remember, Constant, is one of the highlights is a presentation over lunch from the keynote speaker for the conference, who heads the Stern Business School in New York, a Jamaican by birth, who migrated to the United States when he was young, and he is going to be speaking over lunch, and we can go into that in more detail.
Maybe just to pick up on the theme of the conference, resilience and growth are interrelated. What do you mean by resilience? Our kids, when they fall, you see they come up very, very quickly, right? So you want an economy that can recover from shocks. And when you look at many of the Caribbean countries which are tourist dependent, they were hit very hard by the global financial crisis. And most of them are recovering, are going back to their pre-crisis production level only this year or next. That speaks to weak resilience. So how to strengthen that resilience is something that policymakers will be discussing during the conference.
Wonderful. All right, let me get more specific now, and you raised it before, but session 1 is entitled The Caribbean Growth Challenge, Crime and Youth Unemployment. We know that unemployment is considered one of the primary factors that influences crime and other antisocial behavior, and we just want to see the connection between that and growth, and making especially our young people, understand the connection, and so use that as, I suppose, motivation to help grow the country, as opposed to involve themselves in antisocial behavior and set the country back, essentially. Can you just weigh in on that for me?
Sure. I mean, that's a big topic.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, just to give persons an idea of what they're going to talk about when you get there.
Absolutely. Well, various studies have shown, studies done here in Jamaica, studies done by multilateral bodies based in DC and other places, that crime has a massive impact on economic growth. And you just have to sort of think about it, right? What does high level of crime retards economic activity? Because of a prevalence of crime, persons circumvent their own personal activities.
That's right.
You can't have products and services available at certain times of the day or in certain places. So it inhibits.
Low productivity, and persons are afraid to do business and things like that.
Exactly. It inhibits economic activity. You can't have production shifts going 24 hours unless they're in certain kinds of areas. Your security costs are higher, therefore your products and services are not as competitive as they would be if you didn't have high security costs, and so on. So crime is a drag on economic growth. We have also seen countries that have managed to address crime. We have seen the impact it has had on their economic growth. Colombia is a case in point. The former president of Colombia was here several months ago, and their experience was that between 2002 and 2010, when they had massive progress in arresting their particular problem, which is different from ours, their particular problem with crime, kidnapping, violence, organized gangs. They had growth, moving from 2% to 8%. Now, correlation is not causation, but the data suggests that the reduction in crime levels had a big part to play in the phenomenal growth that they experienced. So crime retards growth. A reduction in crime definitely accelerates growth. Now, that's easy to say and easy to study. The question is how
do we actually do it?
Yes, and the youth unemployment, while we want economic growth is merely a means to an end, right? We want economic growth because ultimately we want jobs. We want economic growth because we want income, and jobs provide income. So while we are concerned with things that affect growth, we have to also be concerned with what affects the provision of jobs. And talking about youth unemployment, training, education, and so forth become relevant. We have some experts on the panel, some of them from Jamaica, Professor Anthony Clayton from the University of the West Indies, who is a expert on crime he has studied crime in parts of the world, but in particular in Jamaica. And we have persons from other countries in the Latin American hemisphere and from DC who have specialized in this area. I don't know if you want to add anything.
I want to weigh in because as somebody who's relatively new to Jamaica, and having witnessed firsthand the problem of crime, how do you sum up how it affects our economic growth and our bringing it down will actually influence our growth potential?
Yes, certainly growth and crime are intrinsically related. When you just look at some of the number, a recent study shows that crime costs 4% of GDP to Jamaica per year. That's a very large number. Just imagine what you can do in Jamaica with 4% of GDP. So that's big. And if you look at the numbers, youth unemployment is twice as large as unemployment among the 30 and above, which also speaks to that linkages between crime and unemployment among the youth. How do you break that vicious circle? It's a question that panelists will elaborate on. But you can think very quickly on the economics of crime. Typically, people will make choices on what to do. So what you have to be doing is to find a way to minimize the gains from crime, which will encompass the justice system and setting up a business environment which would encourage or would generate jobs opportunity for the youth. But I don't want to go.
I don't want to get into it. But it almost seems that one thing that jumps out to me is that the idea of moving some of those things that happen in the informal sector, and how that we can capitalize on those things to boost our own economic growth, because people suggest that the informal sector, where criminal sector actually generates, you know, a lot of revenue. Somehow, if we can get persons out of that sphere and put them productively into the formal economy, we can achieve better growth. You know what I mean? But we're going to move ahead to fiscal policy and political cycles, which on its face sounds very intriguing, because one of the things that one of the criticisms or critiques is that if after every 4 years or each political cycle there is a knockdown and a rebuild, that in itself impacts growth because there's no consistency, there's no long-term vision. So how will this be addressed in this particular session at the IMF conference?
This is going to be well, all sessions are interesting, but this will be particularly interesting. We have former ex-president of Guyana, President Jack Day on the panel. We have former Prime Minister Golding on the panel. We have Chairman of Sagicor, Richard Biles, on the panel, and someone from the Chile Fiscal Advisory Council. And the panel will be moderated by Chairman of the Gleaner, Oliver Clarke.
Mm-hmm.
Fiscal policy, has to do with how revenues are raised and how the policies under which those revenues are therefore allocated in expenditure. And by definition, fiscal policy therefore sometimes leads to has distributional consequences. As a result of that, there is a temptation in electoral cycles that fiscal policy gets influenced by short-term electoral considerations, instead of being influenced, anchored by some immutable, unchangeable principle. Now, in a democracy, you want fiscal policy to some extent to respond to what the people want, because that's democracy.
Right.
But what you don't want is an abuse of fiscal policy, where it is, in electoral seasons, it's primarily used to advance
whatever political agenda might be with whichever party.
And the Caribbean, countries of the Caribbean, one of the things that will be examined at the panel, to what extent is this dynamic a feature of Caribbean life? What extent do we have examples of policy reversal? And by policy reversal, we mean that hard-won sacrifices, but due to sort of popular considerations, though the gains are reversed.
Right. Put one side in favor, another more expedient kind of
so
approach.
there is no sort of one-size-fits-all solution. All countries, all democracies in the world grapple with this issue, and countries have found various ways of resolving this. We in Jamaica agreed to implement fiscal rules. Those laws were first passed a few years ago under an IMF program, under the EFF.
Right. The extended fund facility.
The extended fund facility, yes. However, we remain in an IMF program, and so the real, if I may dare say, the real test really hasn't arisen, in the sense that the fiscal rules, when you know that you have succeeded, is when you're out of a program and you adhere to your own fiscal rules.
Okay.
But the idea is that you want to have certain, as I mentioned earlier, immutable principles to which your fiscal policy is anchored over the long term. So you can have variation within that anchoring. You can have response to democratic forces and electoral democratic forces and popular considerations.
But certain
key metrics remain fixed. And so the panel will explore to what extent these dynamics are evident in the region, and you can have your own views on that.
Some would say it's more of an examination of what we should do to move past this,
and we want to because you're saying the foregone conclusion.
Pretend it doesn't exist,
yes. So how can we have fiscal rules, and Grenada has fiscal rules, but do we need to do anything else? Do we need any other institutional architecture, especially when we're outside of an IMF program, to ensure that we remain anchored to some long-term objectives?
That's a question I intend to raise towards the end of our interview, but we can go there. Mr. Ngouna, I'm going to just jump ahead to session 3, which is the financial sector, stability and growth trade-offs. Can you just elaborate on what you expect to see coming from that discussion?
Well, yes. To really generate sustained growth, you need financial service, sound financial service. So that stability is needed for growth. And you also need an expansion of financial services. Now, in that process, and when you look at experience in the Caribbean and elsewhere, in that process, some countries have gone to the extreme to expanding too much in terms of credit growth, because the more credit is available, you end up financing some of the low yield, low return projects, which might not generate enough to pay back the debt. And this often give rise to what we call systemic risk, and may put the financial system in jeopardy, in which case you will not have financing going forward for your growth.
And you find this is a feature of our Caribbean fiscal framework for most of the countries, or even Jamaica in particular?
Caribbean countries have gone to both extremes of having too much of financial liberalization and too much of the growth of the finance industry, to go the other extreme of having too little. So the question precisely is how you strike the balance between the two, because too much could lead to bubble or systemic risk, and too little will not be enough to finance the growth that you need. So how you strike that balance is what the panelists will be discussing.
Okay, as you mentioned, session 4 is where Madame Lagarde will be interviewing our own Prime Minister, as well as who's next on
the Prime Minister of Grenada, Prime Minister Keith Mitchell.
I suppose that should be very interesting, because I suppose we'll also get some insight into her beliefs and her views on how the Caribbean is growing. So, I mean, we're our good speakers with this. That one should be very entertaining.
That should be very interesting.
What would you say are some of the anticipated outcomes of the meeting, of the whole forum? Are there any targets that are being set aside that will be used to guide growth and development in the region going forward, in Jamaica in particular and other countries as well? Are there any hallmarks that you're looking to take away and say, okay, yes, we've established these as the things we'll be using as guiding principles going forward?
Well, one of the things that we hope for is, a ventilation of certain very important sort of considerations. All of these topics are relevant to Jamaica, are relevant to the policy-making process. Over the next few years, there is going to have to be a policy response, for example, to the topic that Council was just talking about, which has to do with financial sector sort of regulation. There's going to have to be a policy response to that, speaking from a Jamaican perspective. So what would be great would be for this topic to be properly ventilated, and for the audience consists of people in the private sector, financial sector, people in policy-making positions in the public sector, and the shall I say, the information that comes out of the session, the arguments that are made, in a particular direction, or the counter arguments made in another direction. What we hope is that they have an influence on policy. The same would be true in the discussion on fiscal, we call it fiscal politics, meaning fiscal policy and electoral politics. That to inform, and that information will provide a sturdy foundation on which the policy debate can occur.
All right, so we'll have hopefully some essential things that we as a region can use to raise, because I find it hard to believe that the Caribbean is experiencing this low growth. I don't want to call it chronic, because I'd like to believe that we have enough ingredients across the region to move ourselves forward and suppose be among those more competitive ones.
Yeah.
Right? Our engineer would like you to sit forward, Mr. Ngouna, just come forward a little bit.
And as I said, we have done it before.
Exactly.
Right. So that the innate confidence that you have and optimism that you have for the region is well placed. The Caribbean region has before been at the forefront of growth in the world, and I think we all believe that it can do so again.
All right. Just to recap, what are the total number of countries represented and number of delegates expected in support of the, or do you have the information?
The number of attendees.
Right.
We expect approximately 300 people to be in attendance at the conference, to give you approximate numbers. We expect to have over 30 or 40 people coming from the IMF or thereabouts, maybe rough numbers. We have participants from, if we give you a rough estimate, maybe 10 or 12 Caribbean countries, including participants at the highest levels, prime ministers, former presidents, governors of central banks, financial secretaries. And so the regional participation will be extremely high at the level of contributing to panels and so forth. And we've had an overwhelming response thus far from local leaders in the private and public sector.
Right.
So we expect vibrant
and well attended. All right. And just to be clear, where will it be held?
at the Pegasus Hotel.
I'm going to shift tack a little bit and address Mr. Ngouna. One of the without public buy-in to the objectives created from the government's partnership with the IMF, there really won't be any success. But I suppose you've probably heard it before that there's a strong section of society who may have a little distrust for the IMF's relationship with Jamaica. I think many are wondering if it's a hard-line kind of reforms that are being pushed by the agency that might see some of them, for example, in the area of public sector reform, they might see themselves losing their jobs, and many persons might be of the impression that it's more hard economics as opposed to factoring in the human capital and their feelings, emotions, that kind of thing. How do you respond to that perception? What do you say to persons who might not necessarily believe that the IMF is working with Jamaica to move the country forward?
Well, maybe I will start off by saying that we're here to support the government, to support the Jamaican people in their reform program. This is a homegrown program. And, there are key principles in our discussion with the government that we agree on, but the exact allocation of resources, it's a social choice to be made by Jamaica. I mean, you have EPOC, you have PSTOC, and you have EGC, which are the key monitoring bodies of the reform program. And Ambassador Clarke spoke about fiscal politics. So what you want is post-IMF program to have an institutional setup that allow the Jamaican to take charge. And you will have seen the recent promotion by EPOC on the corner, talking to Jamaicans to make sure
sharing the message.
Yeah, we are all on board, and this is all for the good of Jamaica. And under the program, the government is trying to bring down debt, and as you bring down debt, you release space to do all the beautiful things, to fight crime, to invest even more in education. And if most of your resources are captured by the not so growth inducing activities, you will not be able to generate that growth that you need to raise the living standards of the Jamaican.
And so essentially you're saying that there's really is a firm partnership, so we shouldn't necessarily be worried about whether or not the IMF intends to, or whether the nature of the relationship. Essentially, just want to be clear that persons shouldn't, the key takeaway should be that there shouldn't be any fear or apprehension.
Absolutely not. And Jamaica is part of the IMF. IMF is a conglomerate of 189 member countries, of which Caribbean countries, as Ambassador Clarke just mentioned, and Jamaica, my own country, Cameroon, is part of the IMF. So it's really not a private bank, but it's really an association of countries coming together and putting funds aside in case one of them is sick. They can pull the fund to assist and so on.
Okay. Dr. Clarke, one of the things, funnily enough, in Mr. Lonkeng's one of his writings, he described Jamaica as moving from a dangerous cliff to a quiet plateau. And from the analyst's perspective, they say we're doing well. Our current account deficit is shrinking, net international reserves are growing, and so on. And we hear these indicators saying that the country is doing well, but there are many persons who believe that it's not tangible. They don't see it, and so it's almost like they don't know what to believe, because on one hand they hear a person saying we're doing well, we're doing fine, and for them it hasn't translated for them. So what would you say to them in response to that, and what could you point them to say yes, we're actually moving in the right direction?
Okay, I mean that's a good question. What I would say in response is you just have to look at the job numbers to see the impact. In the last 4 or 5 years, unemployment has come down from approximately 14% to 11%. In the last 12 months alone, or to be more specific, between April 2016 to June 2017, a little bit over 12 months, 50,000 jobs were created. 50,000 more people employed in June 2017 than were employed in April 2016. Now, if you think about the number of persons who are affected from each person employed, you could argue, let's say, multiply by a factor of 3, 150,000 people have been affected by the job growth that has occurred between April 2016 and June 2017. That is a direct result of what the government is doing in partnership with the IMF, the reform programs that are in place. So I'd point to that. Those jobs have come from new businesses being established, as well as from existing businesses expanding. So that the confidence that has been generated on the part of businesses and consumers as a result of the stability that has been introduced by virtue of the reforms has led businesses to expand and to start, and therefore hire new people. I have been to, and as somebody who has been in business, or I have just seen it for myself. Young people, 21 years old, 22 years old, first job, and hundreds of them, thousands of them, and you just have to look at some of the BPO firms. And yes, and the employers are changing. Yes, we have the Graces, the Wysinkos, the Sepras, the NCBs, Scotiabanks, Kmart Wallets. The new growth is coming from companies that don't necessarily make it to the newspaper each day, right? In the BPO sector, you have Sutherland and Xerox and Hinduja and ITEL and IBEX and so forth. And thousands of Jamaicans are being employed. I would say as well, look, just if you want sort of visual clues, look on the skylines of Kingston. I used to have informally something I call a crane index, that you can measure economic activity by looking at the cranes in the sky. And we went through a long period, I would say
many years
after 1993, when the Courtley Center was built. We have had zero construction in New Kingston.
That's true.
Since then. That's a fact. Yeah. You could go around and you would not see a single crane in Jamaica. In Kingston. Okay. Let's just pick any point in time in the past. I don't want to get and pick up. Today, the cranes that you see in New Kingston for the hotel on Lady Musgrave Road, the hotel, the R Hotel right in the smack of New Kingston here, the cranes downtown for the Ministry of Finance building, downtown for the Grace building, the plans to put the new hotel that the Panjam Group bought downtown, the apartment complex that is going up on South Avenue, the cranes up at UWI. You cannot count the cranes, literally.
That's true.
You can't use two hands to count the cranes that are in Kingston.
There's a lot of growth.
Where were the cranes 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago? They were not here. The cranes are here as a result of the successive the reforms that the government and the previous government have made in the economic front in partnership with the IMF. So I give you two things: cranes and jobs. Two tangible visual clues.
I expected you to go into tourism because we the rooms and everything.
Well, how much time are you going to give me?
We don't have that much time.
Maybe just
Sure,
two quick points. So certainly, with the reform that the Jamaican people have embarked on over the past 4 or 5 years, it takes sometimes a little bit of time to really get the boost out of those reforms, because you're talking about deeply entrenched structural impediments. So it takes a little bit of time for people to realize that things have changed, and for some investors to come on board. The second point that I would mention, which is related to the resilience that the forum will be talking about. If you take the case of Jamaica, the growth underperformance has been driven by weather shocks.
That's true.
We went from flooding to drought to flooding
again.
And if you strip that away, you will have a more rosy picture, and that also have distributional impact, because agriculture will tend to be more in the rural area, concentrated in the rural area. So talking about resilience, the question is, how do you ensure that the Jamaican economy and the Caribbean can weather those shocks in a smooth way?
Let me move back to something that you raised not so long ago, Dr. Clarke. In the sense that shouldn't we at this point, having successfully navigated through the extended fund facility first and now the standby arrangement, is there a consideration being given to creating a framework that will see us minding our own shop, so to speak? Ensuring that we are the ones. I mean, it's always the partnership with the IMF has been fantastic in the sense that it has brought that level of oversight and that kind of attention to detail. You know what I mean? And so I suppose many persons, myself included, are happy about that. But we would like to know that there is some kind of consideration being given going forward to ensuring that we are in the driver's seat and that we're able, not just able, but very much interested in making sure that these reforms that were implemented stick and stay, and that we don't have ourselves taking any steps back, going back to that place where we had to really come back and take a hard look at how things were and just make some really difficult decisions to make things change.
You're speaking my language. Right? The collective sacrifice that the Jamaican people have made, labor, people working, businesses, and other stakeholders, we have come too far to engage in any kind of reversal. As has been said before, I believe Prime Minister Holness has said it, previous generations have fought hard to win for us political independence. The challenge of our generation is to ensure that we deliver on the promise and potential of economic independence. And that means being able to make our way in the world without anyone holding our hand.
That's true.
It means being able to allocate resources as we see fit within boundaries of prudence, without oversight from any body or any institution.
Any third party, so to speak.
It means being able to respond to crises elsewhere in the world and to be a net contributor to the international system. And it means having the strength and the reserves and I use that word broadly, to withstand shocks and to withstand natural disasters. Right? Now, to do that, we have come a long way, and at the end of the standby facility, I think Jamaica, macroeconomic stability is entrenched, and I believe we'll have even further progress. To maintain that, the discipline that Jamaica has become accustomed to over the past several years on the fiscal side and on the monetary side will have to continue, and we're going to possibly need institutional sort of infrastructure
to make it happen.
But the will is there. And when I hear your question, I believe that question is on the hearts and minds of many young people,
Jamaicans.
many people, and I would say in particular many young people. And I'm going to kind of go off here, right? Because that is a question that I myself sort of live. The promise of Jamaica,
Yeah.
right,
We see the promise and we see the potential.
has to be fulfilled. It has to be fulfilled, and it falls to us, you, me, those listening, those watching, to do so. But it will require us to take responsibility, right, for our affairs and to make decisions in our long-term interest.
And I must say that Jamaica is on that path. We went from a drawing program. So the previous program was one where each time a review was completed, the IMF actually dispersed money to Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
The current program is an insurance policy. So it's already a step towards what you're talking about, strengthening the ownership, domestic ownership to, after the fund leave. And just on that, the IMF is not only a lending agency. We do provide policy advice. We do provide what we call capacity building. So it's not just about program.
Lending money and program oversight and stuff like that.
We do have technical relationship with countries even where we don't have a program.
Just one last question and then I'm going to wrap. How can young people get involved? I mean, there are many persons like me and men out there who see and feel like they want to contribute somehow and would like to be able to play a role in getting that growth agenda moving forward in a real and meaningful way. Where do we start? What do we do?
I believe that this is a ripe opportunity for entrepreneurial activity, for young people to get involved in business. Right? We have to recast the way we see ourselves. That we young people in Jamaica, you can be the next mogul. You can be the next owner of a small business, the next owner of a medium-sized business. We want a Jamaica where ideas can be turned into action, where prior ownership of capital is not necessary for one to enter into business. And that is a Jamaica that we are intent on creating. Development Bank of Jamaica has a number of facilities available for young people who don't have collateral but who need to be able to access finance, where the Development Bank of Jamaica provides guarantees on behalf of people with good ideas. So I would say the way to get involved today is to think about business opportunities. The 50,000 people who were employed between April 2016 and June 2017, they're going to need to buy stuff for their money, right? They're going to need to procure services and goods. Who are they going to procure from, right? Just think about the pockets of people who are traveling to work each day that weren't traveling a year ago. What are the opportunities that come from that? They're going to need, a pharmacy next door, or and I'm making it, So I think if you can think creatively and think in an empowered way, that young people, young Jamaicans can be anything that we set our minds to, and that's what I would leave you with.
Last word to you, Mr. Ngouna, just to recap the conference itself, just to let persons know and drum up some awareness and let persons know that what's going to be happening next week, Thursday at Jamaica Pegasus Hotel.
Yes, on Thursday at Jamaica Pegasus Hotel, we'll have high-level policy makers from across the region. We'll have international experts who will have dealt with some of the issues that the Caribbean face today. We will be coming together around 300 participants to discuss the structural impediment to growth in the region, including crime, to discuss how you ensure that politics doesn't get on the way of fiscal policy, to make sure how to strike the balance between growth and financial stability, and really discuss how to strengthen resilience of the Caribbean, how to withstand shocks, and even in the first place, how to prevent some of those shocks. So it's going to be very exciting. And the IMF Managing Director, Madame Christine Lagarde, will be there and will moderate the last panel as Ambassador Clarke has mentioned.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for sitting through our interview, Ambassador Dr. Nigel Clarke, Mr. Constance Lonkeng Ngouna, and we will be they will be at the 2017 High-Level IMF Forum next Thursday at the Jamaica Pegasus Hotel, where we'll be talking about growth and not just growing Jamaica, but the region itself. We thank you for joining us and staying tuned. And we do hope you learned something new and took away some inspiration at the very least from Dr. Clarke's pleas. And thank you so much for joining us. I have been your host, Vaughn Davis, and this has been Studio 58A. Please have a good day.